I want to thank our reader for the wonderful reading and Gary Lynn Floyd and our music team for the fabulous music supporting the message today. This month of March, our theme is Choosing to Live, and today our topic is the third way. Often, when conflict arises, we believe there are only two choices: fight or surrender, win or lose, right or wrong. But spiritual wisdom teaches us that there is a deeper creative path, a path of compassion, a path of consciousness and awareness and love. It's not a compromise, it's about transformation. This third way is about spiritual consciousness. So, in conflict and in difficult situations, are you willing to see life for the greater good? While you ponder that question, let me give you your question for the week. What is the one choice you might make today to accept the world I see is the world in me, to learn from conflict, and to expand life by embracing new opportunities? One more time. What is the one choice you might make today to accept the world I see is the world in me, to learn from conflict, and to expand life by embracing new opportunities? So, a young student went to his master and wise teacher and said, "Master, two people in the village are fighting. One says he's completely right, the other one says the same thing. I don't know who to believe." The teacher nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," the teacher said, "this happens often." The student said, "So, which one is right?" The teacher smiled and said, "Both of them are partly right, and both of them are partly wrong." The student looked confused. "But how can that be?" Well, the teacher picked up a small bowl of water and placed it between them and told the student to look into the bowl. The student leaned over, saw his reflection, and then the teacher moved the bowl slightly. And now the student saw a reflection of the window behind him. "Which reflection is the real one?" the teacher asked. "Both are real," said the student. "Exactly," said the teacher. Then the teacher gently stirred the water. Both reflections disappeared. "When the mind becomes still," the master said, "we stop trying to prove who is right. And that is when the third way appears." You know, right or wrong, win or lose, is not productive. Consciousness requires a win-win situation, something that's for the greater good. And in the Course of Miracles, we read, "The world you see is what you gave it, nothing more than that." We often blame the world for our challenges, but the truth is, our perception is shaped by our inner consciousness. You hear me say often, "The world I see is the world in me." What we see outside ourselves reflects something happening within us. Ernest Holmes, who's our founding father, put it this way: "We live in a universe of law in which our thought becomes the thing." Now, that was the point of last week's talk. And if you missed it, I encourage you to watch it. Our thoughts do determine our reality. The world is not merely happening to us, it is happening through us. When we carry resentment, we tend to see enemies. When we carry fear, we tend to see danger. And when we carry love, we begin to see possibilities. As the Buddha said, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. Fear, resentment, judgment, they act like clouds that obscure our clarity. Love and curiosity and forgiveness and courage reveal possibilities. It doesn't mean that we blame ourselves for everything that happens. It means we recognize our power to choose our thoughts. Don't get me wrong. We can have thoughts that are fear or resentment or judgment, or thoughts that don't serve our good. We all have those weeds that crop up, and we don't have to dwell on them. We don't have to allow them to take root. So don't plant them in your garden. Awareness of what we are thinking is the key. That moment of awareness is the doorway to the third way, to a way for the greater good. A man once told his therapist, "Everywhere I go, people seem to ignore me." And the therapist said, "Next." Sometimes the world really does reflect what we're thinking and what's inside of us. And sometimes it just makes for a good laugh. Since the world I see is the world in me, I like to use this spiritual practice to see this third way. I call it the mirror practice. Just notice what you see as your day goes by. Be an observer. And when something bothers you, ask, what might this reveal about my inner state? Or, what in me might this be reflecting? The Buddha once spoke about suffering using the image of two arrows. He said that when something painful happens in life, it is like being struck by the first arrow. That first arrow might be illness or loss or disappointment or criticism or even conflict with another person. These experiences are part of being human. But then the Buddha said, many of us shoot a second arrow into ourselves. The second arrow is the story we tell about the experience. We think things like, why does this happen to me always? This shouldn't be happening right now. That person ruined everything. I'll never recover from this. The Buddha explained that while we cannot always avoid the first arrow, we can choose whether to shoot that second arrow. When we pause, breathe, and bring awareness to the moment, we step into a different possibility. That moment of awareness is the doorway to the third way. Instead of reacting with blame or resentment, we respond with wisdom, compassion, and curiosity. And suddenly, what looked like suffering becomes an opportunity for growth. The circumstances of our lives may not always change right away, yet the way we see our lives can change in an instant. And when our perception changes, new possibilities appear. Learn not to shoot that second arrow. That shift in consciousness is the beginning of the third way. And as we heard from the quote in our reading today by William Ury, conflict in itself is not a bad thing. Conflict is not always a problem. Often it's one of our great teachers. Relationship researcher John Gottman discovered something fascinating about conflict in relationships. Healthy relationships do not avoid conflict. They learn to repair and grow from it. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Spiritual growth works the same way. Christian Sorensen wrote, conflict reveals where consciousness is ready to grow. Every time we feel triggered, something important is being revealed. Perhaps an old belief, perhaps an old fear, perhaps an opportunity for compassion. So here's another spiritual practice that might help. I call it the curiosity practice. When conflict appears, replace judgment with curiosity and ask, What might I learn here? So suppose we imagined a river flowing down a mountain. It moves freely, joyfully, dancing over stones and through the valleys, and eventually the river meets a large rock in its path. The river does not argue with the rock. It doesn't shout, "You shouldn't be here." It does not try to smash the rock or force it to move. Instead, the river simply flows around it. Sometimes it moves gently to one side. Sometimes it splits into two streams and meets again further down. Sometimes it slows down, deepens, and quietly gathers strength. But eventually, the river continues its journey. Over time, something remarkable happens. The rock itself begins to change. The steady presence of the water slowly smooths the stone. Edges soften, rough surfaces become polished, and what once seemed like an obstacle becomes part of the beauty of the river. When we face challenges in life, we often believe we must either fight the rock or turn around and give up. But Spirit invites us to remember the wisdom of the river. There is always another way, a creative way, a compassionate way, a way that moves forward without violence or resistance, a way that flows with wisdom and peace. And that way is what we call the third way. Lao Tzu put it this way: nothing is softer or more flexible than water, yet nothing can resist it. Let's be soft and flexible and know gentleness is not weakness, it's a spiritual strength. The Dalai Lama said, when we practice patience, we discover that our enemies are our greatest teachers. And the Bible echoes this idea in the Gospel of Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. The third way is the path of the peacemaker, not suppressing truth, not attacking others, rather creating something new. Here's an example. Two co-workers are arguing. One insists they must do the project one way, and the other insists on a different approach. And each believes that the other one is wrong. Then one of them thinks to ask this question: what outcome do we both want? Suddenly the conversation shifts and a third possibility emerges. The third way is not a compromise, it's creative transformation. Asking the question about what we both want is a wonderful way to create a third way. And here's a spiritual practice you might try when conflict arises. I call it the conflict pause. Before reacting, pause and take 3 deep breaths. Then ask yourself these questions. What am I feeling? What might the other person be feeling? What solution serves everyone? Or what outcome do we both want? This pause opens the door to the third way and gives us an opportunity to see the situation from a different viewpoint and from an outcome that serves everyone involved. One thing I've noticed in life is that hurting people hurt people, and sometimes we end up the brunt of that hurt. The great mindfulness teacher Thich Nhat Hanh said, when another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself. When we remember this, somehow conflict begins to soften. Instead of enemies, we begin to see fellow travelers on the human journey, where hurt often has us lashing out. That shift in perspective is the doorway to compassion. And again, often the doorway to that third way. Let's return to the work of researcher John Gottman, which is surprisingly compatible with the science of mind principles because it shows how our consciousness and behavior shape the quality of our relationships and our experience of life. I want to quickly share 3 of Gottman's conflict insights. The first one is the soft startup. Gottman discovered that how a conversation begins often determines how it ends. So when conversations start with criticism or blame, they almost always escalate into conflict. Yet when they start with kindness or clarity, the entire interaction changes. So instead of saying, "You never listen to me," or "You're not going to like this," a soft startup might look like, "I'm feeling overwhelmed and could really use some help." This aligns beautifully with the teaching from A Course in Miracles that says, "In my defenselessness, my safety lies." When we drop the need to defend or attack, we open the door to the third way. I have seen in my life that the way I enter a moment shapes what becomes possible within that moment. So let's look at a spiritual practice that I call the soft startup. Before bringing up something difficult with someone, pause and ask yourself, how can I say this with honesty and kindness? How can I say this with honesty and kindness? Both of those are very important. The second Gottman tip is turning toward instead of turning away. Gottman discovered that strong relationships are built through small daily moments of connection. People constantly make what he calls bids for connection. The bids might look like sharing a thought, asking a question, making a joke, or pointing out something interesting. When we ignore or dismiss those bids, turning away from them, connection weakens. But when we turn towards them, the relationship strengthens. This echoes what the Dalai Lama teaches. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. Turning toward one another is one of the simplest ways to live the third way. Every interaction is an opportunity to express the presence of love. So here's a spiritual practice that might help your awareness for those bids for connection. I call it turning towards. For one day this week, intentionally notice when someone reaches out to you, even in small ways, and turn toward them with attention and kindness. The third Gottman tip is repair attempts. Gottman found successful relationships are not those without conflict. They're relationships where people make repair attempts. A repair attempt might be humor, an apology, a moment of humility, or acknowledging the other person's feelings. For example, "I think we're both getting frustrated. Can we start over?" Or, "I'm sorry you're hurt. Let's talk about that." Spiritually, this is the moment we choose consciousness over ego. Admittedly, I find it hard sometimes and difficult to do when I'm in the midst of feeling hurt. And that's when I try to remember these words of Ernest Holmes. Love is the self-givingness of spirit through the desire of life to express itself in terms of creation. Repair attempts are love expressing itself through humility. So let's look at a spiritual practice that might help us with that. I call it repair attempts. Begin with the willingness to say, "I might not be seeing the whole picture." And remember, conflict is not the enemy of our lives. It's often the doorway through which greater understanding enters. When we begin gently, when we turn toward one another, and when we repair what has been hurt, we discover something remarkable. What looks like a battle becomes an opportunity for love. And that is the heart of the third way. Believe it or not, sometimes conflict can be a gift. Sometimes conflict appears in our lives because it's trying to move us forward. I know I tend to cling to the familiar. I think a lot of people do. And it seems Spirit is constantly inviting me into growth. I've been using this quote of the ancient sage Lao Tzu, but I want to repeat it. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Sometimes we have to release the familiar to move into new territory and new opportunities. It's not an easy thing to do, and yet some of my greatest gifts showed up when I was willing to move into uncharted territory in my life. Thank goodness for Mama's faith in me and her constant support. When I used to take new jobs and wondered if I had the ability, she would always say, "You always succeed at whatever it is you attempt." Jonathan Parker reminds us, "Your life expands in proportion to the vision you are willing to hold." So what vision are you willing to hold for yourself? Where are you struggling? And where might life be trying to tell you to expand your thinking and to take on a new life adventure? The third way is also the way of adventure. Not reckless adventure, spiritual adventure. It requires us to have the willingness to grow. There's a true story about a man who moved into a small house on barren land. The soil was dry and rocky. Neighbors said nothing would grow there, but the man began to tending the land. He composted the soil, he planted small seeds, he watered daily, and for years the garden struggled. But slowly the soil changed, and eventually flowers bloomed and vegetables grew and birds returned. The people asked him his secret, and he said this: "I stopped fighting the soil and started working with it." Life's the same. No matter the circumstances, we can tend the garden of our consciousness. We can stop fighting whatever's going on in our life and work with it. Every moment of our lives is a moment in the garden. We're either watering the seeds of fear or nurturing the flowers of possibility. The good news is you're the gardener and you can be awake. My spiritual teacher and Dean, Catherine Economo, reminds us transformation begins when we are willing to tell a new story about who we are. The third way begins with a new story. Instead of saying, "This problem is ruining my life," we might say, "This challenge is inviting me to grow." I know that might sound difficult, and it is, and we can do it. As I said last week, adventure begins when we plant unfamiliar seeds, when we have the courage to step out of our comfort zone and take risks, because some challenges in our life, some conflict, is inviting us to expand our thinking, to let go of who we think we are and expand to who Spirit knows we can be. So let's look at the spiritual foundation of the third way. Science of Mind teaches that divine intelligence operates through us. So we're not limited to old patterns. Science of Mind also teaches us that we are expressions of infinite creativity. Infinite creativity. And Ernest Holmes told us, the spirit within us is always seeking fuller expression. So when we're in conflict or have some challenge in our life, This philosophy tells us that solutions exist. Maybe we just can't see them. We just have to remember this is an invitation from Spirit to seek a full expression of our lives. Life isn't asking us to have everything figured out. It's inviting us into a grand adventure of consciousness, one courageous, compassionate choice at a time. And when we align with Spirit, new possibilities appear. So let's take a look at a spiritual practice that might help us say yes to that adventure and those new possibilities. I call it the third way prayer. When you feel stuck between two options, try this prayer. God is, I am. I know Spirit within me can reveal the higher path, can guide my thoughts towards wisdom, and can show me the solution that serves the highest good for all. I'm grateful for this knowing. I release my words into the divine yes, and so it is. And then remain open. Often the answer arrives in surprising ways. A powerful line from A Course in Miracles is, seek not to change the world, but choose to change your mind about the world. When our mind changes, the world appears differently. And when we open our minds to new possibilities of ways to see solutions to conflict and challenges, we expand who we are and become who we're meant to be. The third way teaches us these profound truths. The world we see reflects our inner consciousness. Conflict can become a doorway to growth, and life is inviting us into larger adventures. As we learned last week and again today, when we tend the garden of our mind, we see new possibilities everywhere. So I invite you to try this spiritual practice, which I call the adventure practice. Once this week, say yes to something new. A new conversation, a new idea, a new possibility, a new way to drive to a familiar location. As I wrap up today, let me give you these words of wisdom from physicist Albert Einstein, who once observed this. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. The third way asks us to rise above into a new level of thinking, a new level of awareness, a new way of looking at spiritual possibilities. So this week, as life unfolds before you, remember this. The world you see is not just the world around you, it's also the garden within you, and you are the gardener. When life presents you with two opposing paths, us and them, win or lose, right or wrong, pause long enough to remember this. Spirit always knows the way. So in summary, how might you truly embrace the third way? Well, know the world you see is the world within you. Our thoughts determine our reality, and learn to respond with compassion and curiosity. Learn from your conflicts. Conflict reveals where it's time for us to grow. And be curious about what you might learn from that conflict. Follow Gottman's advice and use self-startups and turning towards and repair attempts in those conflicts. And expand your life by embracing new opportunities. Notice what vision you hold for your life. And remember, Spirit invites us to seek fuller expression of who we are. So here's your affirmation for the week. How is it I so willingly, energetically, and effortlessly accept the world I see as the world in me, learn from conflict, and expand life by embracing new opportunities? And your challenge is to take some time this week to notice those obstacles and those conflicts in your daily routine and choose to see them as opportunities for growth. And when life presents you with conflicts or two opposing paths, be steeped in the knowing that Spirit always knows the third way. And as always, I ask you to commit to some spiritual practices that might help you embrace the third way. Let's pray. Infinite mind, gardener of the universe, one infinite life, expressing itself as wisdom and as love, and through every person on this planet. This one life is also my life and the life of each of us. I know that my thoughts matter and create my world. I know within every challenge, there's a deeper opportunity. And within every conflict, there's a hidden lesson. And within every moment, there is a possibility of a new way. The third way, the way of compassion, the way of creativity, the way of spiritual awareness. I know that each person heard something in this time we spent together that encourages them to see conflict with new eyes, to release the my way, and find a way to rid themselves of their need to be right and find a way that works for the greatest good of all. I know we see with new eyes, think with greater wisdom, and act from deeper love. I see each of us being the embodiment of divine love, that love which guides our steps with wisdom and fills our days with gentleness and vision and peace. I see each of us rooted in that peace and lifted by love, choosing today to live in divine alignment with the truth of our being, knowing all that we are and all that we might become is love. So may the tapestry of our lives continue to unfold in beauty, purpose, and love. And may we remember to always see truth revealed. I'm grateful for each person who chose to spend some time with us today. Grateful that we can go forth today with an open heart, embracing the practices that support us seeing the third way. So it's with great gratitude, with joy, bliss, and blessings that I release my words into that divine yes, knowing that it is complete, it is done, the yes has been said, it is finished. So I can say amen, and we can affirm it together. And so it is. And I want to thank everybody for continuing to contribute to our community, for helping us to stay afloat. for helping us to pay for that new computer and software that we had to get. I am so grateful for all the donations that come in. Thank you so much again, and enjoy our offertory song.